But let me toss one more question at you, Jocko, because Jim and I have both talked about getting shot down and feeling miserable. After your fight where you accidentally killed one of the Iraqi soldiers, I bet you felt pretty low about that.
Yeah, that's about as bad as it gets.
Yeah.
And it was a horrible situation. It was the fog of war. Mm-hmm. It was multiple units out on the battlefield. It was actually not me that shot an Iraqi soldier. It was one of my small teams that was in a position where, amongst the confusion, they were assaulted by a friendly group of Iraqi soldiers they had one Marine with them. And yeah, it's something that it's hard to make, definite statements or say, I know this for a fact, but there's pretty much not anything worse in war than friendly forces killing friendly forces. That's just as bad as it gets. And it's a real taboo in special operations for sure. It's a taboo in any. And I'll tell you, during the I guess we'll say the dry years in between Vietnam and the current wars we're in, we actually lost the understanding of how these things could happen. And no one really understood the fog of war anymore, and therefore we didn't train to it properly. And so when it happened, it was like an unbelievable thing. It was so bad. It was the absolute worst thing that it could happen. Actually, I would say there'd be one more thing. The person that was killed, the soldier that was killed, was an Iraqi soldier. If it had been a SEAL or an American, I guess that would make it one level higher for me because I would have known the person. Mm-hmm. In this case, it was an Iraqi soldier. Again, a tragic loss nonetheless. But how did I feel? It felt absolutely horrible. And the thing that changed the mindset for me was when I realized that as I sat there and reviewed, because my commanding officer was coming to inspect and review what had happened along with the investigating officer, and the thing that changed my mindset was as I sat there and said, okay, whose fault is this? Whose fault is this? Whose fault is this? Whose fault is this? And I'm looking at all the different mistakes that were made by all the different units and all the different people. And as I'm looking to blame this on someone, it became very clear to me like a bolt of lightning that there was only one person in charge of this, and therefore there's only one person responsible for what happens out there, and that's me. And honestly, when I had that transition in thought, and it was the first moment that I felt actually okay. Mm-hmm. There's a horrible sinking feeling that you get in wartime situations. I guess you can get it in other times too. And I've talked about it with some of my friends. It's like when something is just really horrible is happening, you get this knot in your stomach, and I've never felt it any other times, but when I was overseas, of like, this is, it's the most horrible feeling. Mm-hmm. And that was the most severe I ever felt it, was leading up to my own recognition that, you know what, and where that was coming from was the unknown, and I didn't know how to react to it. And here I was, Mr. Experienced SEAL, Mr., in charge of the task unit, whatever. And yet here I was going, how do I deal with this? Mm-hmm. And I didn't understand how to deal with it. And what I had to do is go to what I actually did know, which is, if you're in a leadership position, you take responsibility for what happens. That's what you do. Mm-hmm. So, hey, that's what you do. And if they're going to fire you, you get fired. Mm-hmm. If they're going to reprimand you, you get reprimanded. If they're going to replace you with someone else, you get replaced. You salute, you do the best turnover you can. You try and give all the information you can. That's what you do. And as soon as I accepted that and looked at it and said, okay, well then that knot started to go away. And I realized that, okay, the real problem here is the way that you're looking at this. But, and then the other big thing is, once you admit and you take ownership of those problems, and you actually not just take ownership of the problems, but you say, here's the problems and here's how we're going to get them solved. Here's the standard operating procedures that we're now going to follow to make sure that this never happens again. Well, then people look at you and they go, okay, he's got a plan. He's not sitting here dodging the blame for this. He's actually taking ownership of the problems, and he's going to get them solved. And I think, I've never had this conversation with my commanding officer about his reaction, but I could see it. I could see it. And the fact that he said, okay, let's make sure it doesn't happen again. I like the procedures that you're putting in place. Use caution, proceed. Whereas I believe that if I would have said, well, it wasn't my fault, it was his fault and their fault and the other guy's fault, he would have said, okay, you're not going to have this job anymore. And I think that's the same thing with life. The minute that you're looking around you and you're saying, hey, it's someone else's fault that I'm in this bad situation. And again, you know what? Okay, there's things that happen. I get that there's things that happen to people. You mentioned one of them. You can get a disease that you can't control. You can have a child get hit by a car. I mean, there's awful things that can happen that you can't have control over. But what you can have control over is how you proceed and how you go forward. And that's the part that you need to focus on, because the opportunity to fix what happened in the past, it's gone. I'm sorry. There's no time machine. There's no way of going back. It's happened. It's gone. Okay, how are you going to move forward? Where are you going to go now? That's what you need to focus on. And I've said that about regret too. People say, oh, I live with no regrets. I'm like, oh, there's all kinds of things I'll tell you I regret, but I don't walk around with them because I can't do anything about them. Like, maybe you would have maneuvered your aircraft a little bit different on September 16th, 1944. You've looked at it. Maybe you couldn't, but maybe you could have. But you don't walk around carrying that because it doesn't matter anymore. And it's the same thing with the things I've been through. It's like, okay, look, I made mistakes. You've made mistakes. We've all made mistakes. Okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to dwell on those and let them, bear down on us? And even things that we can't control. Maybe the mistake wasn't ours or something that we couldn't control. I'm not going to carry that. I'm not going to carry that regret. I'm going to say, what can I do to move forward? And actually, there's a great guy I just had on the podcast named Rob Jones. He's a Marine. He fought in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and he was a bomb disposal, digging for mines, a combat engineer, and he ended up finding a mine, and he found that mine, with his own feet, and he lost both of his legs. And he said something that was awesome. He said, you've got this weight that's bearing down on you. And he was sitting in a hospital bed, and he had this weight that was bearing down on him of he's going to live now the rest of his life with, both legs amputated above the knee. And he said, what am I going to do with this weight? Am I going to let it push me down and bury me under the ground? Or am I going to use that weight to make myself stronger? And I think that's a incredible attitude to have. And by the way, he's about to run 31 marathons in 31 days. He's going to run 31 marathons in 31 days.
Good grief.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Sure.